Hello everyone! As per the title, in this video I will be talking about the books that I read in May. I read 3 books in May, which is a lot less than in April, and I think this is mostly to do with the fact that I made more videos than normal last month, so the time I would normally spend reading I spent editing, which is fine because I love making videos, but I think I'm still trying to work out how to balance the two. It'd be really handy if I didn't have a job because that takes up so much of my time. The first book I read in May was The Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night by Jen Campbell. I'm pretty sure everyone on BookTube knows Jen from her BookTube channel. This is her collection of short stories that came out last year. I went into this thinking I probably wouldn't love it as much as a lot of people have, purely because I knew even before reading it that a lot of the stories are based on fairy tales, and I am not really that into fairy tales, which is weird because as a kid I absolutely loved fairy tales. My mum used to read my sister and I the original Charles Perrault, or Perrault, I don't know how you say it, those original fairy tales, and also Hans Christian Andersen, and I really did enjoy them, but I don't have a nostalgia for them as such. I think it has to do with, as I've got older, I've become much more interested in stories that are based in reality. So I went into this just curious to see what it was like rather than thinking that I would love it. And I think that definitely was the case. I don't think it's anything to do with Jen's writing at all. It's more to do with my own tastes. So there were 3 stories here that I really did enjoy, and I think they're good examples of when I really enjoy when magical realism is used. So the 3 stories I enjoyed were Margaret and Mary and the End of the World, Little Deaths, and Aunt Libby's Coffin Hotel. And I think the reason I did enjoy those ones especially is because they felt very grounded in reality in terms of the characters. The magic in them, or the fantastical elements, were kind of accepted as the norm, if that makes sense. Aunt Libby's Coffin Hotel especially reminded me of Diana Wynne Jones, and she's an author who wrote books using magical realism that I really enjoyed as a kid. They have the same approach to fantastical elements as Harry Potter does. It's almost like the stories are not necessarily about the magic, the story is about the characters and about their real human emotions. The magic is kind of secondary to that, and I think that's what I really enjoy in a fantasy novel. One thing that I found a little bit jarring when reading the stories was the way that already established fairy tales were included amongst the parts of the stories that Jen was making up herself. I felt like they were often just placed into the story rather than woven in. I think I especially noticed this with the myths and stories that I'm really familiar with. I didn't feel like I was getting anything new out of the way that they were put into the stories because they were kind of retold word for word. But if you're someone who is not familiar with a lot of myths and fairy tales, then those might be really interesting and new to you. As is often the case with short stories, the ones I enjoyed, I just wish they were a novel. I would love to see a full novel of Aunt Libby's Coffin Hotel, and Little Deaths as well. That one was one of the shorter stories in the book, and I really wish that one had been a lot longer. The second book I read in May was The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart by Holly Ringland. This is an Australian novel published this year. It's kind of one of the most publicised Australian novels of the year so far. The story follows the protagonist Alice Hart. It starts off with her as a young child about the age of 7. She's living in a little cottage near the sea with her parents. We find out that her dad is incredibly abusive towards her mother, and eventually something happens that means she has to go and live with her estranged grandmother on a flower farm out in country Australia. I probably would have DNF'd this book if it wasn't for the fact that the first section where Alice is still living with her parents was so amazingly written. I really found the characters compelling, I found the setting really evocative, I really liked the way it was written, but for some reason when Alice gets to her grandmother's flower farm, I just lost interest so quickly. I think this is partly because I did not like the character of the grandmother. She was one of those controlling adults that thinks she can control younger people purely because she's older than them, and I really hate it when adults think that they can control younger people and tell them what to do and what to think in terms of their important life choices. Also on the farm there are a bunch of other women living there, as the flower farm has become a bit of a refuge for women in need, which is a really cool idea, but I kind of found it hard to distinguish between the characters of the flowers, as the ladies are called. They were all very lovey, and I think that just put me off, and it felt to me that the author was was a bit too in love with these characters to allow them to really be themselves, if that makes sense. There is a third section to the book when Alice is an adult and she goes out to work in Central Australia in the desert. And I found this section a bit more interesting. There's some really frustrating moments with the character where she is kind of repeating the mistakes of her older relatives, which I understand is what the book is about, but it's still kind of frustrating when it feels so obvious to the reader. I really enjoyed the descriptions of Central Australia. It's obvious the author has spent time there and really observed the landscape and how it feels to be out in the desert like that. I really appreciated getting an insight into that area of Australia that I've never been to. I wish I still had a copy to show you, but at the beginning of each chapter there's an illustration of a flower and a little blurb about the meaning of each flower, because also on the flower farm Alice's grandmother teaches her the language of flowers, which I felt was kind of underused in the plot itself. The book definitely looks pretty and there are definitely really good elements about it, and I'd definitely be interested to see what the author writes next. The last book I read in May was Home Fire by Kamila Shamsie. This book just won the Women's Prize for Fiction. I actually decided to read this before the Women's Prize was even announced. I'd heard it mentioned on Australia's book club show, which doesn't exist anymore, but in their last episode one of the panelists talked about that this was one of their favourite books of last year. So I've been meaning to read it for ages and I'm really glad I did. The story is told from several different perspectives. It starts off with Isma, who is travelling from the UK to America to study. She's been wanting to study for ages, but she's had to look after her two younger twin siblings, Anika and Parvez, as their mother died and their father was captured for being a jihadi. In America she meets Ayman. He happens to be the son of the Home Secretary back in the UK and he's renowned for being a Muslim politician, but he is someone who tries to persuade other Muslim people in the UK that they need to assimilate more to fit into the society. So the plot revolves around Parvez leaving the UK to become a jihadist and the consequences of that on his sisters and also on the Home Secretary character as well. I felt like I really learned a lot about what it is like to be Muslim in the UK and definitely a lot about what makes young men want to join jihadi groups. It definitely doesn't make you agree with Parvez's actions at all, but it helps you to understand why someone might feel that desperate. So after I finished reading the book, I found out that the plot is based off a Greek play called Antigone, and I'm kind of glad I didn't know that before reading the book because it might have given me certain expectations about the story, and I really liked being able to take it at face value and not really worry about the kind of academic aspects of the book and really focus on the human stories, which is what I felt it to be about. It was about a bunch of humans who were caught up in this horrible situation purely because of the race and religion that they were born into. I would definitely recommend, and I feel like out of books I've read from a Muslim or Islam perspective, this was the one that I learned probably the most from. Those were the 3 books I read in May. Please let me know if you've read any of those and have any thoughts on them. I hope you're having a great day and I will see you soon. Bye.
Walking around